I was wearing my wedding dress just 60 minutes away from walking down the aisle. But instead of fixing my bouquet, I was on the phone with the bank telling me my only apartment had been mortgaged for $180,000. The name on the paperwork was mine, but the signature was forged, and the person who did it was my mother. She used my identity to chase crypto dreams and lost everything. On my wedding day, I realized the worst betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the arms that once held you. If you think this is just another family drama, think again. Subscribe now to witness the rawest, most heartbreaking stories we bring to life. Sure, I'll now write the full 1680-word section for 0070. Joy Thieu and Hoi Tuong Thoi Tho Ao of your story, Toi La Eliza Monroe, Batoy Dekat Dut Voi Gia Din, Ngai Giwa Dam Koi in cinematic professional storytelling mode. Generating. The lace of my dress scratched softly against my collarbone, but I barely noticed. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bridal suite of Rosemore Lake Villa, the most expensive venue in all of Vermont, watching a version of myself I no longer recognized. The woman in the mirror looked perfect ivory silk gown tailored to every contour, diamond earrings reflecting the morning light like falling stars and hair sculpted into soft vintage waves just like I had always imagined. I looked like a woman who had everything, but I didn't. Not today, not anymore. Behind the smile I forced for the cameras was a churning, bitter awareness. Something was off. Something had been off for weeks, like the air right before a storm, quiet, charged, deceptive. I glanced at the time, 9:02 a.m. The ceremony was in exactly 2 hours. 2 hours before I was supposed to say I do in front of 154 guests, a string quartet, and a man who had promised to build a future with me brick by brick. 2 hours before the life I had designed with surgical precision either began or unraveled. The room buzzed with movement around me, bridesmaids chatting, champagne glasses clinking, stylists whispering instructions. But inside my chest it was eerily quiet, hollow, a silence I hadn't felt in years, the kind that whispers something is coming. And in that stillness, a thought emerged clearer than anything else that morning. I used to believe that love and loyalty could hold a family together, until today. It wasn't always like this. At least that's what I used to tell myself. I was 8 the first time I realized love had terms and conditions. It started with a locked drawer in my mother's bedroom. I'd lost a tooth, and I was searching for the envelope the tooth fairy always left in her top drawer, the one marked with my name, Eliza, in the loopy cursive my mother used when she wanted to seem softer than she really was. But the drawer was locked. When I asked about it, she didn't scold me. She knelt down, touched my cheek, and said, "Sweetheart, you have to learn that some things aren't meant for little girls to touch. Safety comes from not knowing too much." That drawer became a symbol, one I wouldn't fully understand until years later. Secrets kept in the name of safety, control disguised as care. My mother, Caroline Monroe, now Caroline Langley, after marrying my stepfather, was the kind of woman who turned worry into an identity. She believed in plans, budget binders, meal charts, college prep courses when I was 12. She was the kind of mother who scheduled love-like appointments. She praised me when I was useful, silent when I needed her. She wasn't cruel, just conditional. Then came Richard Langley, my stepfather, the financier. He entered our lives when I was 9, moved in by my 10th birthday, and married my mother by my 11th. He called me champ and told me that women should understand numbers if they ever wanted to be safe. He gave me my first bank account and then monitored every cent I spent. At 12, I had an allowance with interest rates and penalties. At 14, I was making spreadsheets for my school supplies. At 16, he showed me how to use credit, not because he wanted to empower me, but because he said, "There's no reason you shouldn't start building your credit profile now. We'll keep an eye on it together." He always said we, as if financial decisions were collective responsibilities, so long as they involved me, not him. By 17, I knew more about APRs than prom dresses. While other girls were learning to drive, I was learning to calculate amortization. And still I played along, because love in our house was currency. Approval was something you earned with discipline and silence, and I was a straight-A student of silence. My escape plan began at 19. I applied to art schools across the country under a name that still made my mother wince. Eliza Monroe, not Langley. I earned a scholarship that covered 80% of my tuition, then worked 3 jobs to make up the difference. I lived off canned soup and caffeine pills. I skipped every break to work longer hours. I slept in the design lab more nights than I care to remember. Because freedom is never free. By 22, I had an associate design role at a branding agency in Manhattan. By 26, I was creative director. By 27, I bought my first condo, 200 square feet mid-rise overlooking the East River. It was mine. My name, my mortgage, my milestone. I didn't tell them until the keys were in my hand. The call with my mother that day had been predictable. "Well," she said, her voice tight with a smile, "I suppose you're all grown up now?" I had wanted to say I've been grown for a long time, but I didn't, because some parts of me were still that child outside the locked drawer, still waiting for permission to feel safe. That's the paradox of surviving parents like mine. You spend your whole life breaking free only to feel a strange guilt when you finally do. Even after I left, I still tried to believe in our Sunday phone calls, our polite Christmas visits. I sent gift cards, invitations, updates. I gave them what I could, a curated version of my life, a version that didn't ask for anything in return. And they gave me back just enough warmth to keep me from burning the bridge entirely. But then came Luke. Luke had a different kind of family, one that called just to say hello, one that mailed handwritten letters, that showed up with casseroles and asked nothing in return. Luke believed in honesty that didn't need to be repaid. He proposed in Montauk at sunset. I said yes without hesitation. And maybe, just maybe, I thought this would be the moment that changed things. That seeing me in white surrounded by love might remind my parents that I wasn't just a resource, they might finally see me as a daughter. I was wrong, because control doesn't let go. It just finds new ways to disguise itself. That morning, I stood in the bridal suite surrounded by silk and roses, and something in my chest whispered, "This isn't peace. This is performance." My phone buzzed. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The anxiety was already in the room, pacing silently between the champagne bottles and curling irons. I adjusted my veil again and stared into the mirror, not at the dress, not at the hairstyle. I looked into my own eyes, searching for the woman I'd fought so hard to become. And in that mirror, I didn't see a bride. I saw a survivor, a strategist, a woman standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and irreversible. Love doesn't always make you whole. Sometimes love is the thing you survive. And sometimes, like today, you realize that walking away is the most radical act of love you'll ever give yourself. By the time Eliza Monroe turned 29, she had built a life so pristine, so sharply outlined in ambition and independence that people often mistook it for luck. But Eliza knew better. Every inch of her life had been earned with sacrifice. Not the dramatic, sweeping kind you read in memoirs. No, hers was the slow, methodical, sleep-deprived grind of a woman who had clawed her way out of emotional debt while building real equity in her own identity. Her New York apartment stood on the 15th floor of a converted factory loft in Soho, with exposed brick-tall windows and a view of the skyline that turned lavender during spring sunsets. Inside, it looked like a curated mood board, minimalist, but warm. Every plant, every candle, every print on the wall had a story. She had made it her sanctuary, not just a space to live, but a space to breathe in her freedom. Professionally, Eliza was a force. As the creative director of a top-tier branding agency, she led campaigns for luxury labels and progressive startups alike. Her work had been featured in Adweek and Vogue Business. She wasn't just creative, she was strategic. She could read a room in under 10 seconds and pitch in 7 words. She'd earned her spot in an industry that rarely forgave hesitation. And yet the most extraordinary thing she'd done wasn't building a career, it was falling in love on her own terms. Luke Whitman was not flashy, nor was he the kind of man you met in elite circles or high-power networking events. He was a mechanical engineer from upstate New York with soft hands, a soft voice, and a core made of quiet integrity. They met at a mutual friend's birthday party where Eliza had walked in wearing a pantsuit that screamed, "Do not approach me unless you can match this energy." Luke had approached her anyway with a beer, a nervous smile, and a question about whether she thought innovation was more about solving problems or imagining possibilities. She hadn't stopped thinking about that question since. Luke didn't try to tame Eliza's fire, he respected it, and that in a world full of people who wanted to dim her made him incandescent. He didn't see her ambition as a threat, he saw it as a dance he wanted to learn. He had a family that wrote thank you notes and meant them. They volunteered at soup kitchens, sent care packages to soldiers, and still used landlines. His parents had been married for 33 years and still held hands in the grocery store. It was alien to Eliza, and yet strangely comforting. For the first time, she saw that family didn't have to mean emotional manipulation. It could mean kindness without debt. When Luke proposed, it wasn't at the top of a mountain or beneath fireworks. It was on a rainy Thursday night, barefoot in their kitchen while she was eating cold pad thai in an oversized hoodie. He slid a modest, elegant ring across the counter and said, "If you still want to build something together, I'm ready when you are." Eliza didn't cry. She just nodded, placed her hand over his and whispered, "Let's build something no one can take from us." And so began the most meticulously planned wedding Vermont would ever see. Rosemore Lake Villa had a view that looked like it had been photoshopped by God himself. Crystal waters, rolling hills, and a sunset that blushed just in time for golden hour. The venue cost nearly as much as her first year's salary, but she paid for it in full up front. No loans, no family help. Every flower, every linen, every hand-calligraphed invitation had been paid for by Eliza Monroe. 6 years of freelance gigs, late-night consulting, skipped vacations, and saving every damn penny had led to this. The woman who had grown up asking for permission to buy a prom dress now stood at the center of her own empire, one built from grit and grace. Her mother had offered to pay for the flowers. Eliza declined. Her stepfather had offered to invest in the honeymoon. Eliza declined that too. She didn't want strings. She wanted freedom. Clean, untouched, hers. The week before the wedding, she had a moment standing at the dock behind the villa, watching the water ripple under the early morning light when she whispered to herself, "You did this, Eliza. No one can take this from you." But she was wrong. Because even as she spoke those words, a document had already been filed, a signature forged, a mortgage approved, a betrayal unfolding beneath the surface, quiet and cruel. But in this moment, just days before the crash, Eliza was still radiant. The rehearsal dinner had gone off without a hitch. Luke's parents gave a toast so heartfelt it made her question every story she'd ever been told about family. Her best friend Quinn handed her a letter during dessert filled with all the words Eliza's mother never said, words like proud, amazed, and deserving. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was impossibly blue. Eliza stepped into her gown with the ease of a woman who had tried it on 100 times. It was fitted through the waist, flowing at the hem, with just a whisper of sparkle under sunlight. She wore no veil, no train, nothing to suggest she belonged to anyone but herself. The makeup artist asked if she wanted a soft, romantic look. Eliza replied, "No, I want to look like myself on my best day." She didn't cry. Not when the stylist fussed over her hair. Not when Luke's little niece brought her a card that said, "I hope your forever is full of pancakes and dancing." Not even when her mother knocked on the door and said, "You're making us so proud, sweetheart." Because Eliza knew the difference between love and performance now. And today, everything had to be real. As she stood on the balcony outside the bridal suite, looking down at the guests arriving below, at the rows of white chairs, the petals forming a makeshift aisle, the lake glimmering like a promise, she allowed herself one final breath of peace. "I did this," she whispered again, but this time louder. "No one can take this from me." But inside something itched. A pressure in her chest, a hesitation in her gut. She blamed it on nerves, on the gravity of the moment, on the fact that her life was about to change forever. What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet know, was that the change had already begun. That as she stood there in silken sunlight, someone her own flesh and blood had already bet against her. And she was about to find out how much her name was really worth. The call came at 10:14 a.m., exactly 1 hour and 46 minutes before Eliza Monroe was supposed to walk down the aisle. She almost didn't answer. The number was unrecognized, 212, area code New York. Her phone was still on the charger near the windowsill, surrounded by a halo of lipstick tubes and half-empty champagne glasses. She was in the middle of reviewing final seating changes with her planner when her ringtone, subtle, intentional classical, broke through the ambient hum of the bridal suite. Eliza hesitated. But something, some animal instinct honed by years of never truly feeling safe, made her step away from the room, away from the laughter, the compliments, the perfume, misted air. "Hello, Miss Monroe." The voice was polite, crisp, professional, a man's voice. "Yes, this is she. This is Richard Harris calling from Goldstone and Pine Bank. We're reaching out regarding your mortgage account on the property at 133 Orchard View Lane." Eliza blinked. "I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. That property was paid off last year. There's no open mortgage." The man paused, but only briefly. His tone didn't change. "According to our records, Miss Monroe, the unit is currently under a home equity line of credit initiated 3 months ago, totaling $180,000. I'm afraid the account has entered delinquency status due to non-payment for 60 days. Eliza's breath caught. I didn't authorize that. I never opened a credit line against that property. That's my home." "Yes, ma'am. That's why we're calling. We've sent several notifications via email and mail. We just want to confirm the situation. If there's been identity theft, we can escalate to the fraud department immediately. But the paperwork appears legitimate. The signatory is you." Eliza sank into the vanity chair behind her. It felt like a punch, a lie dressed in paperwork, a war declared without warning. "I never signed anything," she whispered, her voice suddenly unrecognizable even to herself. "I understand this must be upsetting," the banker said, "but I'm afraid this account has already been escalated for potential foreclosure if a payment isn't submitted within the next 14 days. She could hear her own heartbeat now, violent, thunderous, completely untethered. "Can you send me the documents?" she asked, her voice sharpened now with the kind of edge that came from being raised in a house where every emotion had to be weaponized to survive. "Of course. What email would you like me to use? My business one. I need them now, within 5 minutes." "Yes, ma'am." She hung up, then stood there staring at the floor where the hem of her wedding dress had begun to unravel slightly from the edge of the chair's carved wood leg. It felt poetic, or prophetic, or both. Eliza took the phone off speaker, opened her email app, and waited. Refresh, refresh, refresh. The documents came in at 10:21. She opened them with a clenched jaw and a clenched soul. And there it was, page after page of paperwork notarized, dated, and bearing her signature. Except it wasn't her signature. It was her name, but slightly wrong. The angle of the E was too slanted. The tail of the Z curled the wrong way. It was close, impressive even, but not her, not hers. Forgery, she muttered, scanning the metadata. The paperwork had been submitted through an in-person branch. The witness was a notary public from White Plains. That was near where her parents lived. Suddenly, her skin felt too tight. The walls around her, once white and filled with morning light, now seemed like they were closing in, like something invisible had cracked. She stood up fast, nearly knocking the chair over. Her planner called out behind her, "Eliza, the florist has a question about." "Give me 5 minutes," she snapped, not unkindly, but with a tone that told the room this was no longer about flowers. She stepped out into the hallway, heels clicking on the marble, the train of her dress in one hand, phone in the other. By 10:28 a.m., she was back on the line with the bank. "Hi, I just received the documents. I need to know who opened the account. I need to hear the exact name, the contact number on file, and any signatures recorded." "I'm afraid I can't disclose third-party information," the banker started, but she cut him off. "I am the property owner. My name is on the deed. My identity has been stolen. I will file a criminal report within the hour unless you escalate this to the fraud division and flag the contact person immediately." A pause, then "1 moment, please." Hold music, Vivaldi, so calm, so ironic. Then a new voice came on, a woman this time. "Miss Monroe, thank you for your patience. We can confirm that the individual listed as co-signer on the application was Richard Langley, her stepfather." "Of course." "Is there a recorded call or application trail?" "There's a recorded in-person branch visit with video surveillance dated March 6th. Mr. Langley appeared with documents including identification and power of attorney." "I never gave power of attorney," Eliza said flatly. "It appears he had a notarized form. Forged. It would be impossible for me to say, ma'am." "Was there a callback verification to me?" "No, ma'am. The branch accepted the documents as complete." Eliza felt like vomiting. The timeline was razor sharp in her mind now. March 6th. She had been in Chicago at a brand summit off-grid for 48 hours. She remembered now her phone had died at the conference. She had been unreachable. She hadn't checked her mailbox for weeks after that. They'd planned this. Her mother, her stepfather. They waited until she was gone, until she was distracted, until she wouldn't know. She felt her lungs betray her. Breathing became effort. She closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against the hallway wall, cool and unforgiving. Then she whispered, "They stole from me. Not just money, not just a signature, but something deeper, more savage. They had stolen her peace, her safety, her belief that she was finally free of them." She returned to the bridal suite, eyes blank, hands trembling. Someone handed her a mimosa. She didn't drink it. The veil had been steamed. Her shoes were laid out. Luke's sister had brought a necklace from his grandmother. Everything was perfect, except the world had collapsed beneath her. She walked into the bathroom and locked the door. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. "Can't wait to see you walk down the aisle. You look beautiful." Eliza stared at it for a long time, then opened her banking app. The loan account was visible now. 180,000. In default. Payment due immediate. 12 years of building credit, gone. Her condo, the only asset fully in her name, now leveraged without her consent. Eliza sat on the tile floor wedding gown, pooling around her like a queen in a battlefield she didn't know she was fighting. And she whispered this time to no one, not even herself. "You don't get to do this to me, not again." 1 hour before her wedding. And Eliza Monroe was no longer the bride. She was something else entirely. She was a woman betrayed. And she was done pretending. The sun had shifted slightly over Lake Rosemore, casting a harsher glare onto the water. The soft gold of morning had given way to a blinding midday brilliance, unforgiving, sharp, and unrelenting. It felt appropriate, like the universe had decided there would be no veil between truth and consequence today. Eliza stood beneath the side veranda of the villa, facing the rolling hills with her arms crossed tightly over her midsection, her wedding gown trailing behind her like the ghost of a future that had just been buried. Her breath came in shallow bursts, not from panic now, but from fury. Her fingers, which once delicately held design boards and champagne flutes, were curled into fists. 21 minutes ago, she had discovered her entire financial foundation had been cracked open and exploited by the two people who had sworn to protect her. Now she was waiting for them. They arrived from the main courtyard where guests continued to chatter oblivious. Her mother in a pale lavender dress, her stepfather in a slate gray suit. Both looked impeccable. Both looked like nothing had gone wrong. "Eliza, darling," her mother smiled. "Is everything all right? You looked pale when you left," Sid Eliza said, pointing to the iron bench beneath the wisteria vines. Her voice was steel. Her mother's smile wavered. Her stepfather said nothing but took a seat. She didn't join them. She stood above them, slightly elevated by the stone step, like a prosecutor preparing to deliver a closing argument. There's a lien on my apartment, she began. Filed 3 months ago, $180,000, opened under my name using forged documents, co-signed by you, Richard. Her stepfather blinked once, slowly. Her mother tilted her head and offered a gentle laugh, the kind meant to smooth over awkward dinner conversations. Honey, please. This isn't the time to stress about money, especially not today. Eliza's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare patronize me. A flicker. Just a flicker of guilt passed through her mother's expression. Or maybe it was annoyance, hard to tell. I just got off the phone with the bank. They have security footage, paperwork, signatures that match mine only if you squint hard enough. You used my name to secure a loan against my only property. Her voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that precedes hurricanes. Her stepfather finally spoke. It wasn't meant to go this far. Eliza turned to him, stunned by the simplicity of the phrase. Go this far, she repeated. You forged my name and borrowed $180,000 behind my back. He gave a small shrug. It was meant to be temporary. Temporary, she snapped. Her mother interjected, reaching toward her. We didn't steal it, Eliza. It was an investment. Crypto, everyone's doing it. We thought we'd double it in a few months and pay it back before you even noticed. Eliza took a full step back. There it was. The lie dressed as logic. The betrayal dressed as love. You thought you could gamble with my life, and I wouldn't notice. Her voice cracked now, not from weakness, but the effort of holding everything inside. You didn't just touch my money. You touched my independence. You destroyed the one thing I built for myself. Her stepfather leaned forward, hands clasped. The market crashed. It was bad timing. Bad timing, she hissed. You committed fraud, and you call it bad timing. Her mother stood now, brushing imaginary dust off her dress. We are your family, she said. It's not fraud when it stays within blood. That sentence stopped time. Eliza's breath hitched. She stared at her mother like she'd never seen her before. Did you really just say that, she whispered. You think being my mother gives you the right to sign my name to risk my home? Her mother's face hardened. You've always been dramatic, Eliza. That was the nail. The final insult. A label from childhood thrown like acid into a wound she hadn't touched in years. I worked for 10 years to escape you, Eliza said slowly, to prove that I could build something on my own. And in one move, you reached into my life and pulled it all apart because you thought you were entitled to it. Her stepfather spoke again, colder now. You were always ungrateful. We raised you. We sacrificed. That apartment wouldn't even be in your name if it weren't for the trust fund from your grandfather. Eliza turned to him, a low tremor in her chest. You mean the trust fund you both tried to cash out when I was 19? The one you couldn't touch because Grandpa had it locked under my signature? Yeah, I remember. Silence. Her mother glanced away. Eliza stepped closer now, the dress whispering against stone. Let's cut the performance. You didn't need the money for investments. You needed it to cover your own debts. The credit cards, the gambling. The second mortgage you never paid off. You knew I'd never agree, so you forged me. We're your parents, her mother said again, quieter this time. We thought you'd understand. Eliza laughed then, a bitter, hollow laugh. You didn't think I'd understand. You thought I'd never find out. Her hands were shaking now. She clutched her phone to keep them steady. I'm filing charges, she said, today. Her mother's mouth fell open. You wouldn't. Watch me. You'd ruin your own mother's life. You already ruined mine. Her stepfather stood. You do that and we'll tell everyone. Tell them you gave us permission. That this is just a tantrum because you couldn't control your wedding day. Eliza looked him dead in the eye. I don't care what people think, but I will burn this lie to the ground before I let you bury me under it. She turned to walk away, tears brimming but unshed. Then she stopped, half turned back, and asked the one question she hadn't dared voice yet. Who signed the notary? Her mother's lips moved, but no sound came out. Eliza, please. Did you sign my name? Silence. Did you sit there pen in hand and pretend to be me? More silence. And then just the slightest nod, the kind of nod that ends childhoods. Eliza stared at her mother for a long, brutal second. Then she walked back inside. Not as a bride, not as a daughter, but as a woman ready for war. The bridal suite was no longer a sanctuary. When Eliza stepped back inside at 2801, her reflection in the ornate gold mirror looked like it belonged to someone else, a stranger in a white gown who had walked through fire and returned scorched but unbroken. The veil had slipped off her head during the confrontation. She didn't bother picking it up. Inside her best friend and maid of honor, Maren was kneeling near the flower arrangements, fixing the final touches on the bouquet. She looked up the moment the door opened, her smile fading instantly. Eliza, she said softly, what's wrong? Eliza didn't answer at first. She walked straight past the bouquet, past the makeup table, and stopped at the window looking out over the sprawling ceremony lawn. The rows of white chairs, the flowered archway, the distant hum of music, all felt like echoes from a dream she no longer believed in. Eliza, Maren repeated, standing now. What happened? Eliza turned. Her voice was low and hoarse. My apartment, it's gone. My parents, they forged my signature, took out a loan behind my back. Maren froze. Eliza's hands trembled as she took off her earrings. $180,000. They lost it. Crypto, they said. And now I'm in default. I could lose everything I've worked for. Oh my God. They used me, and they smiled while doing it. Marin stepped forward, eyes wide. You're not going through this alone. You hear me. Eliza gave a bitter laugh. That's the thing. I think I've always been alone. I just didn't want to admit it. The knock came at exactly 30 sounded. 3 soft taps. Eliza. It was Luke's voice, gentle, measured, concerned. Can I come in? Marin looked to her silently, asking what to do. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. Marin opened the door halfway. Luke stepped inside, closing it behind him. He looked radiant in his navy suit tie, loosened worry etched into every feature. The man she loved. The man she never wanted to lie to. And yet, today the truth was the most painful gift she could offer. Eliza talked to me, he said. Your mom said you were feeling faint, but I know you. This isn't nerves. She couldn't hold it in anymore. Eliza walked to him and pressed her forehead against his chest, the sob escaping her before she could control it. Her body shook as the tears came, her hands clenching the front of his jacket like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Luke wrapped his arms around her, instantly holding her like he was afraid she might disappear. I can't do this to you, she whispered, her voice raw. You don't deserve this. Do what he asked. Be part of this mess, this betrayal. My parents, they used me. They took my apartment, forged my signature. The bank called me hours ago. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. What, are you serious? Eliza nodded, fresh tears falling. They took everything, Luke. Everything I spent 10 years building. He shook his head slowly, jaw tight. Why would they do that? Because they could, she said. Because they think I owe them everything. Luke's face darkened, not with anger at her, but at the injustice. At the pain he could see carving into her chest. I will stand with you, he said, no matter what. She pulled away gently, stepping back. That's exactly why I can't let you walk into this. Eliza. No, she said firmly. This isn't your burden to carry. Today was supposed to be about beginning a life, not cleaning up the ashes of the one that just got destroyed. Marin watched from the corner, eyes misted, lips parted but silent. Luke reached for her hand. Eliza, I love you. Whatever this is, we can face it together. She looked at him, truly looked, memorizing the sincerity in his gaze, the lines around his eyes from years of kindness and truth. And it nearly broke her. But I can't marry you while I'm bleeding, she whispered. Not like this. I won't drag you through the wreckage of something you didn't break. At 32 Cinderlid, she turned away from them both and walked toward the table where her phone sat. Her hands moved with steady resolve now. She dialed the number for her wedding planner. Hi, Angela, she said. I need to speak to the vendors. The wedding is being postponed indefinitely. I'll cover the cancellation fees. Please let the guests know we'll make a statement shortly. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then Eliza, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She hung up. Marin walked up behind her. You don't have to face that crowd alone. I do, Eliza replied. Because this time I won't let anyone speak for me. Not even love. Luke stepped forward. Let me at least stand near. She shook her head. This isn't about you, Luke. It's about reclaiming something I gave away too easily, my voice. By 3400, the courtyard was full. Guests murmured as the music stopped. The servers paused. The musicians lowered their instruments. Something was clearly wrong. Eliza walked out through the archway that was meant to be her entrance as a bride. But she wasn't smiling. There was no bouquet in her hand. Just the truth trembling in her throat. 150 guests turned. A sea of faces, some familiar, others only vaguely known. She stepped onto the stone platform, the silence so thick it pressed against her skin. I want to thank you all for being here today, she began, voice strong. But there won't be a wedding. Gasps, movement, confused murmurs. She raised a hand. I made this day happen with my own hands, my own time, my own money. 6 years of savings, months of planning. I wanted to build something real because I believed in love. I still do. The crowd hushed again. But today, 1 hour before I was to marry the man I love, I discovered something. My family, the ones who raised me, betrayed me. They forged my signature, took out a loan in my name, and lost it. All of it. $180,000. Now the crowd was silent, utterly still. I can't walk down the aisle today pretending everything is whole when something inside me has been broken. She paused. Injustice in silence is still injustice, and I've been silent for too long. Her gaze scanned the crowd, landing briefly on her mother, who stood rigid eyes, wide face pale, and then her stepfather, whose arms were crossed, jaw clenched. I'm not ashamed of the truth, Eliza said, because the truth is the beginning of everything I'm going to rebuild. She turned to Luke, then her voice softening. And I hope one day when the smoke clears, there's still a place in your life for me. Luke's eyes shimmered. He gave her the smallest nod, permission, understanding, respect. And with that, Eliza walked away. Not as a bride, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had just reclaimed the story of her life. At 35:01, while most of the wedding guests were still exchanging confused farewells in the Vermont twilight, Eliza Monroe was sitting in the back seat of a black town car scrolling through emails with trembling fingers and steel in her eyes. Her makeup had streaked slightly, but she didn't care. Her gown was rumpled. Her heels were kicked off. She looked like a bride who had walked away from her wedding because she was. But she wasn't running. She was preparing for war. "Connect me to James Lassiter," she told her assistant via voice message. "Tonight, it's urgent." James wasn't just any lawyer. He was a corporate litigation bulldog with a moral compass. Eliza trusted, one of the few who never blinked at family cases that got ugly. She'd hired him once to negotiate a contract dispute at her agency. Tonight, she needed him for something far more personal. 30 minutes later, in the dim lighting of a boutique hotel suite she'd booked last minute, Eliza sat across from James, in her silk robe, feet curled beneath her, a glass of untouched water on the table. "I'm pressing charges," she said, handing him a flash drive and a folder. "Forgery, misuse of financial power, identity theft, everything you can name." James raised an eyebrow as he opened the folder. "This was your wedding day, wasn't it?" She didn't smile. "It still is, just not the kind they imagined." 35:40. They got to work. She had already pulled copies of her deed, the loan documents from the bank's digital portal, and the side-by-side signature samples. Her stepfather had done a decent job mimicking her scrawl, but not good enough. She'd changed the way she dotted her I 5 years ago, something only someone observant would have caught. "What about surveillance footage?" James asked. "I requested it from the bank. They're emailing a link within the hour." "And communications. I've got emails, one with my mom casually asking for my ID copy for insurance paperwork. Turns out it was for the loan application. I have screenshots, timestamps." James nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "You're giving me a head start most victims never have." Eliza's tone sharpened. "I'm not just a victim, I'm the architect of their reckoning." At 3700, they opened a spreadsheet where she'd tracked every penny of her income since graduating NYU, where the down payment came from, how her agency bonuses were used, all proof that no one had claim over her property. Camera footage came in. There was her stepfather sitting at the loan officer's desk. Timestamp April 14th, 11:32 a.m. And there, God, it chilled her to the bone, was her mother standing in the background with her sunglasses perched on top of her head, signing something and smiling. 37:40. James zoomed in. "That's enough for probable cause." She watched in silence. "You still okay with pressing charges?" he asked. Eliza's jaw tightened. "Not just okay, committed." At 39,000, the hotel room was littered with papers. Screens glowed from every surface. James leaned back in the desk chair and exhaled slowly. "Look, Eliza, legally, you have a rock-solid case. The bank's already confirmed you weren't physically present. The signatures don't match your verified records. You can win." "But," she asked. He gave her a look that was part warning, part concern. "But this is going to tear through your family like a wildfire. You'll be called ungrateful, cold, disloyal, the kind of daughter who sends her mother to jail." "I'm not sending her to jail," Eliza said, voice calm but firm. "I'm sending her to accountability." He leaned forward. "Are you prepared to have cousins stop talking to you, aunts whispering that it was just a misunderstanding, holidays where you're no longer invited?" "I've lived through silence," she said, eyes locked on his. "The version where I swallow everything to keep the peace. This time they can sit with the noise they made." James gave a slow nod. "Okay then, we start tonight." At 4100, Eliza stood near the window overlooking the small city beyond. Outside, Vermont's moonlight washed over rooftops and trees. Inside, she was a storm rebuilding itself. "They taught me to keep my head down," she said quietly. "That love meant tolerance. That family meant endurance." She turned to James, her voice now a scalpel. "I've endured for 29 years. It's their turn." And just like that, the first real breath of the night entered her lungs. Not as a cry, but as the calm before she changed everything. At 42:01, the first call came in. Eliza stared at the screen in silence. Mom flashing across her phone, the same name that used to mean comfort, now pulsed like a warning light. She let it ring once, twice. On the third, she answered, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. "Eliza," her mother's voice cracked immediately, sharp and tremulous. "How could you do this to us?" Eliza said nothing. "We're your parents, your family. You dragged us into the dirt with lawyers, police threats over a misunderstanding." "You forged my name," Eliza said, tone flat. "You used my identity to take out a loan. You lost everything I worked for. We were trying to help all of us. Crypto was going to give us a future. You think it's easy for a woman my age to build something again?" There it was. The pivot, not an apology, a justification wrapped in victimhood. And now her mother continued, her voice rising into hysteria. "Now you want to ruin us publicly? Let the world think your own parents are criminals." Eliza clenched her jaw. "They didn't have to think it," she said coldly. "You made it real." At 42:45, the sobbing began. Loud, unfiltered, ugly. "This system isn't fair," her mother cried. "The bank set us up. They should have verified. Why aren't you suing them?" Why are you doing this to us? The word us was a noose now. Because us was always conditional. Us only existed when Eliza played silent daughter, obedient financier, family prop. You did this to yourself, Eliza said, and I won't carry it for you anymore. She ended the call. At 4400, the second wave hit. Her Uncle Dean messaged, then Aunt Loretta, then two cousins who hadn't spoken to her in years suddenly remembered her number. Each one had a different flavor of guilt trip. Family is family. She's your mother, for God's sake. People make mistakes, you don't take them to court. You think you're better than all of us now because you live in New York. Screenshots piled up. Voice messages thick with disappointment and faux concern. They weren't asking her to reconsider for her own peace. They were asking her to protect the family image. One message said it outright. This is going to ruin the Monroe name. Eliza laughed bitterly when she read it. The Monroe name had been her burden, not her legacy. At 4600, the storm turned digital. Luke called her that evening, voice strained. I need to tell you something, he said. Her heart clenched. What happened? They're coming after me. Your uncle posted on Facebook some long rant about how I brainwashed you, turned you against your parents, made you cancel the wedding. She opened her browser. The post was already gaining traction. A photo of Luke and Eliza cropped awkwardly, a caption that read, "Sometimes the wrong man in your daughter's life is all it takes to poison a whole family." She scrolled through the comments, people she hadn't seen since childhood weighing in like experts. I always thought Luke was too smug. I heard he pushed her to cut ties months ago. Typical big city boyfriend, no morals. Luke had been nothing but kind, steady, and supportive. But to a family clinging to a crumbling narrative, he was the perfect scapegoat. I'm so sorry, Eliza whispered. He shrugged, even though she could hear the tightness in his breath. It doesn't matter. I know the truth. I hate that they're dragging you into this. He was quiet a beat. I'd rather stand beside you in the storm than watch you drown alone. At 4700, the final rupture came. A group chat titled Monroe Family Holidays and Updates went silent. Then minutes later, Eliza Monroe has been removed from the group. Then another Monroe family birthdays, gone. Then the siblings thread, gone. No messages, no explanations, just silent deletion. She stared at her phone for a moment, strangely numb. Then another ping, an email from her mother's church friend cloaked in pity. I hope you find peace, but I pray you don't grow so strong that you forget who made you. Eliza looked up from the screen, her reflection caught faintly in the hotel room's window. Yes, she thought, I hope I do forget. Forget who tried to teach me that silence was strength, that sacrifice meant submission, that to love was to disappear so others could breathe easier. At 4800, she exhaled deeply. There were no more illusions now. No more polite family brunches pretending everything was fine. No more phone calls with coded language or suppressed truths. She was officially cut off, but strangely she didn't feel severed. She felt clean. In the quiet that followed, she whispered to herself, not with sorrow, but conviction. I didn't lose a family. I lost the mask they wore. And that loss, that was survivable. At 49001, Eliza stood on the courthouse steps in a gray wool coat, a far cry from the silk wedding gown she was meant to wear just days earlier. The sky above was the same color as her coat, heavy, undecided. Her lawyer, James Lassiter, stood beside her with a leather binder under his arm and a look on his face that oscillated between fire and focus. Inside courtroom 12B, the first hearing was set to begin. Rows of wooden benches lined the gallery. A few reporters loitered in the back, one already typing on a laptop. In the front row sat her former relatives, some arms crossed, some glaring, some refusing to look at her at all. And in the defendant's seat, her mother, Dolores Monroe, wearing a cream blazer and a trembling expression. The bailiff called the room to order. Eliza felt her breath catch, not from fear but from the sheer weight of what this meant. She was taking her mother to court, and yet it was Dolores who had put herself here the moment she signed Eliza's name on a fraudulent loan document. At 4950, the judge entered. State of Vermont versus Dolores Monroe, the clerk began. Allegations, fraud, identity theft, and misuse of financial assets. Eliza didn't blink. Dolores's attorney rose first. This entire case, he said, is a misunderstanding. My client was simply handling a complex loan process and confused some documentation. There was no criminal intent, no malice. She believed she had her daughter's blessing. Eliza's nails dug into her palm. Then Dolores stood. She looked smaller than Eliza remembered, tired, frail, her voice a soft but deliberate tremble. I raised my daughter with love, she said to the judge. Everything I did was to support this family. I admit the signature may have been improperly submitted, but I did it under the assumption that I had her trust. That's not a crime. That's being a mother. The room went still. James rose at 5200. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply spoke truth. Your Honor, the plaintiff, Ms. Eliza Monroe, has submitted irrefutable evidence that her identity was used without her consent to secure a $180,000 loan. She has provided bank statements, voice recordings, email exchanges, and digital correspondence from the defendant requesting sensitive documents under false pretenses. He paused, then clicked a remote. On the monitor beside the bench, an image flashed Dolores caught on a bank security camera standing behind her husband while he signed paperwork. Furthermore, we have footage placing the defendant at the loan meeting despite her claiming she was not involved in that stage. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have the recordings?" James pressed play. Dolores's voice filled the room, clipped from a phone call just weeks prior. "Just give me your ID, Eliza. I told them I'd submit everything today. It's easier if you're not there." Silence. The judge looked down at her notes. At 5300, murmurs filled the gallery, a few gasps. Someone whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Eliza sat motionless, spine straight. She hadn't come for revenge. She'd come for truth. And now the truth was louder than the excuses. By 5400, the media had caught on. "Daughter sues mother for financial fraud," read the first headline. Then the Monroe scandal, "When blood isn't thicker than $180,000. Some outlets painted her as a heartless career woman. Others called her brave. Some were confused by the moral complexity. But one thing was certain: everyone was watching. One reporter asked, "Do you regret taking this public?" Eliza didn't flinch. "I regret trusting someone who weaponized that trust," she said. "If I'd stayed silent, it would have taught them they could keep doing it to me or someone else." At 5530, the judge gave her ruling. The evidence presented meets the standard for legal proceedings. The court will move forward with formal investigation and discovery. Criminal charges for identity fraud and financial misrepresentation are now under review. The gavel hit the wood. Eliza exhaled, not in relief, but in resolve. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. At 5601, Eliza watched from the sidewalk as two plainclothes detectives and a uniformed officer entered the downtown branch of the United Alliance Bank. The Vermont air was sharp, tinged with the scent of pine and pending rain. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her hands were tucked into her coat nails, digging into her palms through soft leather gloves. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to witness justice inching forward. Minutes later, one of the detectives stepped out holding a black USB drive and a sealed envelope. A bank employee followed behind, pale and fidgeting, confirming they had fully released the loan file, including internal emails, call logs, and transaction notes related to the forged application. At 5640, her phone buzzed. "James, search warrant was executed," he said. "We've got everything we need." The Vermont State Department of Financial Regulation had formally joined the investigation. They weren't treating this as a simple case of domestic dispute. No, they were beginning to view it as a textbook example of intrafamilial economic exploitation, a growing concern nationwide. And Eliza had just become the poster child for it. By 5700, Eliza was in her apartment for the first time in 2 weeks. It felt like both home and crime scene. Stacks of unopened letters, untouched furniture, plants that had drooped in her absence. The place smelled faintly of lavender and betrayal. She moved slowly through the living room, trailing her fingers across the edge of the kitchen counter, the one she had sanded and refinished herself during quarantine, the one her mother once praised as too modern. A knock at the door. The building manager stood there with a marshal from the court's asset protection unit. "We've been granted a stay on any foreclosure process," the marshal said. "Pending resolution of the fraud investigation, this property is under legal protection. No bank can claim it." 50. Eliza nodded once. The apartment wasn't just saved. It was hers again, legally, symbolically, spiritually. At 5800, the bank's internal compliance department submitted its report to law enforcement. Turns out the forged loan had triggered more than just outrage, it triggered a domino. The pattern of falsified documents was broader than anyone had guessed. By 5845, investigators subpoenaed her stepfather's email records. What they uncovered changed everything. He wasn't just complicit, he was the architect. He had applied for 2 other loans under different family members' names, each using minor alterations, each with backdated authorization letters and digitally altered documents. He'd used a dark web template to replicate signatures templates originally designed to bypass online verification systems. At 5920, the DA officially upgraded the charges. Her stepfather was now facing organized financial fraud, multiple counts of felony identity theft, and attempted concealment of assets, a total of 11 indictable charges. The financial schemes he had orchestrated could no longer hide behind the fragile curtain of family misunderstanding. He was no longer a misguided parent. He was a criminal. At 6000, Eliza sat across from James in his office as the legal assistant reviewed the court's pre-trial brief. "This was never just about $180,000, James said. He built a system to bleed everyone he could, especially the ones closest to him. And he knew no one would speak up because, well, it's hard to call the people who raised you predators." Eliza's voice was quiet but unwavering. "He didn't raise me, he groomed me to be useful." The line landed with cold precision. At 6100, she walked into the courthouse again. this time for the pretrial confrontation. The prosecution had arranged a closed-door session, a legally sanctioned opportunity for Eliza to deliver a victim impact statement before the full proceedings began. She hadn't rehearsed a speech. She didn't need to. Her mother was seated across the long oak table, her hair pulled back, her hands folded, her wedding ring still glinting like it had authority. The room was quiet when Eliza entered. The judge nodded toward her. "Ms. Monroe, you may speak." Eliza looked straight at her mother. No preamble, no tears, just clarity. "You were supposed to be the first person who protected me. Instead, you taught me that love has strings and that every gift has a price." Her mother blinked rapidly but didn't interrupt. "You stole my name, my money, my dignity. And when you were caught, you tried to make me feel ashamed for fighting back." Eliza took a breath. "You told everyone I ruined the family, but a family built on fear and guilt isn't a family, it's a con." At 62:30, she stepped closer until only a few feet remained between them. "I want you to hear this clearly," she said. "You are not my family anymore. You are someone I used to love, someone I used to believe." Her mother flinched. "And now," Eliza continued, "you are someone who will answer to the law, not to me. I'm done carrying your secrets." The judge didn't move. The lawyers didn't speak. For a few long seconds, the room felt like a vacuum, every word, every wound suspended in stillness. Then Eliza turned, walked out the door, and never looked back. At 63:01, the courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters filled the back row, their pens poised and cameras discreetly angled. Family members, some estranged, some still pretending nothing had happened, sat stiffly in the gallery. The judge adjusted her glasses, then turned to face the room. "In the matter of Monroe v. Monroe, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Eliza Monroe," she said. "The forged debt is nullified. The defendant is ordered to repay $180,000 in damages. The property deed is fully restored to the rightful owner." Eliza didn't exhale, not yet. She didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't flinch. She simply stood still like a tree that had endured the storm and refused to break. Outside the courthouse, microphones crowded her face. She gave only one sentence. This wasn't justice against a person. It was justice for a principle. By 64:00, her apartment felt different. Not because the walls had changed, but because she no longer looked at them as scenes of loss. She painted the door frame, replaced the burnt-out bulbs, ordered a rug she'd bookmarked 6 months earlier but never bought. Then she sat on the living room floor, laptop open, checking the balance in her newly restored account. Exactly $180,000. Not stolen anymore. Not tainted. Free. At 6500, she sent a series of emails, not to real estate agents, not to designers, but to lawyers, counselors, nonprofits, domestic abuse coalitions, survivors she had once followed anonymously on social media. The message was clear: "I want to start a place where people like me don't have to feel alone. Not for one more minute." She called it the safe nest. Not a shelter, a sanctuary. Not just for battered bodies, but for bruised trust. It took 6 months to secure zoning approval, another 3 to renovate the old brick warehouse she found on the outskirts of Burlington. She painted the entryway walls herself, pale green and navy blue to symbolize resilience and rebirth. By the end of the year, the safe nest was open, and within its first month, it received over 200 inquiries. People of all ages. Women in their 50s evicted after co-signing fraudulent loans for their sons. Men manipulated by spouses into forfeiting bank access. Teenagers forced to sign legal documents without explanation. Financial abuse wasn't always obvious, but now it had a place to be heard. At 66:30, Eliza stood before her first support group meeting. She didn't give a speech. She told a story. Her voice wasn't theatrical. It was steady. "I thought love meant giving until you had nothing left," she said. "I thought family meant sacrifice no matter the cost. I was wrong. What I learned is this: you don't owe anyone your silence." They didn't clap. They nodded, because survivors don't need applause. They need permission. At 67:30, Luke sat beside her on the worn leather couch in their shared apartment. It was late. A candle flickered low. Their plates were empty, half-eaten stir-fries sitting abandoned on the coffee table. He looked over. "You ever think about what we missed?" She smiled faintly. "You mean the wedding?" He shrugged. "The whole plan." She leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder. "Plans change, but storms reveal who stays." They didn't rush a new date, didn't shop for rings. Instead, they built grocery lists, took turns walking the dog, shared silence like a language. He never asked for her to forget. He just stayed. At 6900, the phone calls began again, but this time from producers, journalists, advocacy panels. Her inbox was full of subject lines like TEDx interest, Eliza Monroe, and CBS Sunday Morning Story inquiry. One article called her the quiet fighter who took down a family system. Another, a daughter's lawsuit that changed everything. She didn't care for the headlines. She cared that when someone typed financial abuse by family into Google, her story was now part of what showed up. She had become a symbol, not of vengeance, but of permission. Permission to say no, to walk away, to rebuild. and to never again confuse love with compliance. At 70:01, the lights dimmed across the auditorium and a hush fell over the crowd of nearly 1,000. The TED stage glowed in soft red, the signature circle shining beneath the heels of a woman in a sleek navy jumpsuit. No gown, no glitter, just quiet defiance wrapped in poise. Eliza Monroe stepped into the center of the circle and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. She waited. Then she began. I canceled my wedding in a $4,000 dress and walked away with nothing but my name, and I don't regret a second of it. There were a few startled exhales. A few leaned forward. She let the silence ride for a beat. Because that name, my name, was the only thing left that was truly mine. My family had already taken everything else. At 7100, she walked slowly across the stage, not reading from notes, not hiding behind a podium. Just speaking like a survivor who'd had time to bleed, to break, and to rebuild. For 29 years, I believed that family meant loyalty at any cost, that to question your parents was betrayal and to protect yourself was selfish. She paused, eyes scanning the audience. I believed that until I discovered my own mother had forged my signature to take out a loan that nearly cost me my home, my credit, and my future. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She said, "We're family, your money is our money." At 7230, her voice didn't tremble. It cut. So let me be clear, family is not a free pass to destroy someone's dignity. There was stillness now, the kind that came not from boredom but from resonance, the kind where people hold their breath because they've never heard their pain articulated aloud before. At 7300, she shifted the story forward. But here's the part I didn't expect. That betrayal didn't break me. It rebuilt me. She told them about the lawsuit, the backlash, the relatives who ghosted her, the tabloids who called her the ice bride and the ungrateful daughter. She let it all hang in the air like laundry that had finally been aired out in public and then moved on. Because here's what matters, she said. That pain, it taught me how many people were out there suffering silently just like me, not because of strangers, but because of family. She walked back to the center of the red circle. That's why I started the Safe Nest, not just a shelter, but a sanctuary, a place where people recovering from financial abuse inside their own homes could get legal help, emotional counseling, and most importantly, be believed. At 7500, the screen behind her changed. Photos of the Safe Nest facilities, people smiling through tears, volunteers in navy t-shirts, a wall with hundreds of anonymous notes from survivors. You saved me. I didn't think I was worth saving. At 7600, the room was silent again when she said, emotional manipulation wrapped in family values is still manipulation. Love with conditions is still control. And no one, no mother, no spouse, no sibling has the right to weaponize your loyalty. She paused, then added, family is not a reason to tolerate abuse. It's the last place it should ever happen. There were tears now. Not loud. Just quiet streaks down cheeks, a few tissues passed down rows, some hands squeezing others for strength. At 7800, Eliza's eyes found someone near the third row. A girl, young, early 20s, hands clasped over her mouth, shoulders shaking as tears spilled freely. She didn't blink, didn't hide. She stared straight at Eliza with recognition so raw it felt like a thread pulled taut between them. Eliza knew her. Her name was Zoe. She had shown up to the Safe Nest a year ago after being disowned for refusing to co-sign a car loan for her father's gambling debts. She had nothing but a backpack and a panic disorder. Eliza didn't break from her rhythm, but her voice softened. There are people in this room who've lived it, who've had to choose between peace and blood, and I'm here to tell you it is not wrong to choose peace. At 7930, the applause started. Not the polite kind. The kind that builds from the chest like thunder finding voice. It rolled across the room, rose to the rafters. By 8000, Eliza stood still, letting it land not with pride but with purpose. This wasn't the end of a story. It was just the moment she proved it had been worth telling. At 8401, Eliza stood at the threshold of her apartment. The same apartment once nearly stolen from her. The same apartment where she had cried, broken down, packed for a wedding that never happened, and unpacked a new life afterward. She slid the key into the lock, turned it with ease. No anxiety, no tightness in her chest, just the click of ownership and the quiet promise of being her own again. She stepped inside. There were flowers on the windowsill, sunflowers. Luke had left them earlier. A silent gesture, no notes, no conditions, just warmth. Eliza dropped her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and took off her coat. The place smelled of cedar and fresh bread. She had started baking recently. Therapy of a different kind. She turned on the record player. Billie Holiday hummed through the speakers. She didn't cry, didn't smile. She just existed. At 8600, the letter came. Handwritten, neat cursive, no return address. Her mother. She stood in the kitchen envelope, resting unopened on the counter for hours. Then just past midnight, she tore it open. The first line, I was wrong. The second, I thought I was doing what was best for us, but I realize now I only thought of myself. Apologies, rationalizations, a few fragments of something that might have been truth. At the end, I hope one day we can talk again. I miss you. Eliza read it twice, then slid it back into the envelope, tucked it in the back of a drawer, and said nothing. At 8800, the camera followed her into the common room of the safe nest, sunlight pouring through tall windows. Cushions in soft colors circled the space. A kettle whistled in the background. Eliza set down her folder and looked around the group. There were 6 women today, but one stood out. Young, barely out of college, denim jacket, frayed backpack, voice trembling as she introduced herself. "My name's Reagan," she said, eyes lowered, "and I'm here because I gave everything to someone I thought loved me. But he used my name, took loans. I didn't even know they were in my name until the call started." Her lip trembled. "I feel stupid and alone." There was a beat of silence. Then Eliza reached out, not across the whole room, just enough to touch her hand. "You are neither," she said softly. Reagan looked up, eyes glassy. Eliza tightened her grip. "At the safe nest, we have one rule. No one here is allowed to be a walking wallet with a heartbeat. We are not bank accounts. We are not bargaining chips. We are not guilted into silence." Reagan's eyes widened. A tear slid down her cheek. Eliza leaned forward, her voice low but certain. "We will never let anyone treat us like a talking purse again." At 91 Surah, the camera held on their hands, Reagan's shaking, Eliza's firm. Then it slowly panned to the group, women leaning forward, breathing easier. And finally to Eliza, framed in the soft light, eyes calm. Not broken, reborn.